Abba Messiah. בני ישראל מארץ מצרים בשנה הרביעית בחודש זיו הוא החודש השני למלך שלמה ישראל המקיש מלכות שלמה ליציאת מצרים. מה יציאת מצרים? מניסן אף מלכות שלמה מניסן ויצאת מצרים. תקופה מלן מניסן דזכר. מה כאן ליציאת מצרים? אף כאן ליציאת מצרים. וממה מעשה האב קדים, דילמה מעשה שבט קדים לו. Or maybe that's 60, that's 70. 74. יכתיב אחרי הכותו. זרק אבן לרשות הרבים, הרי זה קולה. רבי אליעזר בן יעקב אומר, אם כשיצאת האבן מידו הוציא הלז את ראשו וקיבלה, הרי זה בטוח. I wonder where everybody is. I wonder where everybody is. Well, I don't know who is watching. My regulars who usually come on about this time for the Zoom, they're not here. I'm not seeing them. So maybe they forgot. You know, you take a couple of weeks off. You take a couple of weeks off for for a vacation, and then people forget. Let's see here. There we go. Hey, there's Marilyn. Hi, Marilyn. Oh, I can't hear you. You're going to have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
I can. That's so much better.
Okay. I want you to know I was very successful. I worked all day yesterday, but I got an appointment for both of them.
Oh, way to go.
January 20th, Memorial Center. Thank God.
What's the date? When are you getting it?
January 20th.
Wow. And it's going to be Yetziat Mitzrayim. It's going to be like the Exodus from Egypt. You're going to be out of prison.
And let me tell you, I'm like a different person. It was making me nuts yesterday.
How did you do it? Because I haven't been able.
How did I do it? It was perseverance. I had a website from Memorial because I use a doctor from Memorial. So he has all my records on this website, and I kept doing it over and over, and I was ready to give up. And my sister said, go back. I said, I'm not sure if I did it right. She said, try it one more time. I was just like totally finished. No, I went back and she was right. And I fixed it and I got a confirmation and I printed it out and we both have it. It's an hour apart, our appointments, but I don't care. We'll read a book in between.
Hey, I would wait 3 hours to get it, 5 hours to get it. I'd take the whole day off. I would take the whole day off to get it.
So did you try also?
You know, I've tried, I haven't tried for a day or two. I was trying, you couldn't get through on the phone. You
Terrible. About 100 times I tried. Terrible.
And you couldn't get through on the websites were crashed. They were saying, taken down to better serve you, will be online later. But I need to really bear down and get it.
You know what you have to try? Call Memorial Hospital Direct, Memorial, and have them connect you to the COVID extension. That's what Helene did, and she succeeded. She succeeded. Not by calling herself, by calling the hospital first, and then she got somebody in the hospital to connect.
Who did this? Helene did it?
Helene, right.
Wow, excellent.
She was lucky, right?
Well, Mazel Tov. I am so happy for you. Good for you. And you're going to be able to get out and you're going to go, la, 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 la.
Well, let me tell you, you still got to wear your mask because it's not going to kick in until after the second shot.
You get some protection, I think, with the first.
It's definitely an improvement.
And even if after you get the second one, wear your mask, even if you're not going to be able to, you're not going to get infected and you're unlikely to be a carrier, you know what? It's just the right example. You don't want to look like you're flaunting, you know, something very important. Okay. So are you ready to study a little bit?
I'm ready to study a little bit. I've never known so much in my whole life since I'm in the pandemic. It's like wild, but
okay. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to teach you a little bit about the Mishnah, okay? And the Mishnah is very important. The Mishnah is the heart of the Talmud, okay? You remember there are two parts of the Mishnah, two parts of the Talmud, the Mishnah and the Gemara. You put them together and you get the Mishnah. Now, the Mishnah was edited. It was written down.
The Mishnah is separate from the Gemara. I'm confused.
Well, you put them together. You put them together. This is
the stories, the Mishnah, the stories, the commentaries, the stories.
Yes. Look, this is what a page of Talmud looks like this. Look, take a look here. It looks like this. It always begins with the Mishnah and then it goes on to the Gemara. And I'm going to teach you the difference between the two. Hi, Betty. The Mishnah,
Hi, Betty.
hi, Betty. Good to see you. The Mishnah was written down in the year 200 CE. That's the way we Jews say AD. We say CE. It was written down by Judah Hanasi. Judah the Prince, just know him as Judah the Prince. He was the most important of the rabbis in that period. And he wrote it down in Hebrew. Now that's interesting in itself, because by that time, the Jews, even the Jews living in Israel, weren't speaking Hebrew anymore. They were speaking Aramaic, which is kind of like Hebrew, but it's different. It was the everyday language. The Bible was written obviously in Hebrew, and later on the Gemara, which was written down around 500, about 300 years after the Mishnah, that was in Aramaic. That was in Aramaic, the everyday language of the Jews. But Judah seems to have wanted to give the Mishnah a certain status. If it was written in Hebrew rather than Aramaic, it sort of put it on the same level as the Bible, right? If it was written in the same language. If it was written in the everyday language, it wouldn't be so holy. And he himself was very devoted to Hebrew, even though every day on the streets he spoke Aramaic. At home, it is said that Judah Hanasi spoke Hebrew. Even his servants spoke Hebrew. But the rest of the rabbis, they certainly could read and translate and write in Hebrew, but they undoubtedly they spoke Aramaic. Now, why the Mishnah at all? The word Mishnah comes from a word meaning to recite or to repeat. The Mishnah was what we call the oral tradition. Oral because it was passed down from generation to generation, not in a written form, not in a book, but by the spoken word.
Mouth to mouth, because they couldn't write at that time. There was no printing. So every family told their children and the children's children. That's the way I remember.
That's the way it was. But the Torah, but the Torah, like the Torah scrolls behind me in the Aron Kodesh, in the Ark, they were written down. They were called the written Torah. So they knew how to write, but a lot of people, but you're right, Marilyn, a lot of people didn't. It was,
no printing. That's the problem.
There was no printing. People had to write everything down, and they had to handwrite everything. Now, why the Mishnah? Why did we need the Mishnah at all? Why did we need an oral Torah at all? The written Torah, the Torah on the scroll, those 613 commandments that we speak of in the Torah, they are kind of vague. They're vague. They lay out certain principles, but they don't tell you how to apply them. Let me give you an example. It says, "Thou shalt not murder." I think we would all agree that's a good commandment. But what's murder? What is murder? If someone attacks me in a dark alley and I kill the person in defending myself, is that murder? Well, the answer is no, it isn't, because we Jews believe in self-defense. But it has to. But the Torah doesn't tell you one way or another. If a person breaks into my house in the middle of the night, or not in the middle of the night, in the daytime, and I see him carrying out my computer out, and he's got one step out out the window, if I shoot him, is it murder? Torah doesn't, it needs to be discussed. What if my, is murder only the taking the life of a human being? Otherwise, hey, if I eat a hamburger or a steak, is it murder? Well, you know the answer, but the Torah doesn't say that. The Torah doesn't give us any any explanation. Shabbat, it says, you shall not work on Shabbat. What is work? There are only 3 things that are forbidden in the written Torah on Shabbat. They are lighting a fire, traveling beyond a certain distance from your house, and carrying something. But what about pruning my trees on Shabbat? What about going to the mall? And what about cooking? It doesn't answer. There's another law. It says, it's in the book of Leviticus, chapter 19. It speaks of leaving the corners of my field unharvested for poor people, and for the Levites, the priests, and for the stranger. I have a field. I harvest everything, but I'm supposed to leave the corners for the poor, the priests, and the stranger. Well, how much is a corner? I could have a whole acre of land. I could do a corner that's only 6 inches, right? It would be nothing. Maybe, just a few sprouts would grow there, a couple of, corn cobs or something. Is that what it means? We have what constitutes a corner? What's the minimum? What's the maximum? And who is a stranger? Is it a Jew? Is it a non-Jew? Is it someone just passing through? Who's poor? It just says poor. Do I have to do a means test? A lot of those. And so to answer questions that would grow up like that, you needed an oral tradition to say, okay, what do we mean by this? What do we mean by this? That miserly guy over there with his field, he only leaves a little tiny corner. He's not being charitable. Isn't that law supposed to help poor people during the harvest season get a little something to eat? That's not enough. We need to discuss it. Now, how did the rabbis justify these laws? Incidentally, you will find laws, you will find mitzvot that are not mentioned in the written Torah, but you and I will say, Asher kiddushanu v'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, who has sanctified us with the mitzvot and has commanded us. Let me give you an example. Lighting.
Excuse me, Rabbi, I'm confused. A mitzvot is a commandment. I always get confused what mitzvot means.
A mitzvah is a commandment. Mitzvot is plural. So it says, we say when we light our candles, we say, who has commanded us to light candles or lights on Shabbat. It doesn't say that in the written Torah. But throughout the ages, they said there was a tradition that was handed down from Sinai that we're supposed to light lights on Friday night and on the eve of holidays. So, who gives the authority to be able to discuss these things? In Deuteronomy, it says, when you have a problem that you can't figure out, go unto the judges who shall be in those days, and you shall inquire. Whatever they say, you do.
To go to the judges.
So they're judges. They're really talking about rabbis, it seems here.
Right.
Scholars in later generations. If you need clarification, you go to your rabbi. You go to a scholar, and they have the authority to be able to tell you what is acceptable.
It's in the
And-
Bible. It tells you to go to the judges. That's
Yes,
in the
in
Bible.
Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 8, it says, in those days, in the future, if you don't know, if you can't quite figure out what does it mean, for
Check with
example,
Judges.
it says, here's the thing. It says, thou shalt not steal, right? Good commandment. But what's stealing? What if I'm selling you something? I'm selling you a house. Hey, I just sold a house and just bought a house week before last. Okay, so this is fresh in my mind. You have disclosures, right? If I know something is wrong with the foundation of my house, it's cracked, and when it rains, it leaks. And I put down some covering so you can't see it, and maybe the inspector misses it. Is that stealing from you? I'm stealing your ability to make an educated decision whether or not to buy my house, right? In a way, I've stolen from you. I haven't really stolen an object from you, but I've committed a bit of a fraud there. I hid something. I stole your ability to be able to make a conscious, intelligent decision of whether you're going to buy my house or not. Ah, that's what the rabbis decided later on. You can steal someone's mind in a way if you so there were lots of things that needed clarification. So we go on. So the Mishnah quotes about 158 scholars. And Betty, would you please tell me all of those 158 scholars? I can't even tell you, and I've studied this stuff. There are 158 scholars who are mentioned, but there are a dozen. There are about a dozen that are mentioned frequently. And some of these names you may have heard, and they're mentioned a lot. Akiva, Rabbi Akiva.
Sure.
Okay? You've heard of him. Rabban Gamliel. You may have heard of him. All Shlosha Devarim HaOlam Omed. All on three things the Torah, or the world is sustained by Torah, by worship, and by deeds of loving kindness. And now, if you are a devotee of Kabbalah, you've heard of Simeon ben Yochai, Shimon. Some people say Shimon bar Yochai. He was the founder of Kabbalah. He's mentioned. Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Chalafta. Now, if you've gone through the traditional Haggadah, you've come across Rabbi Tarfon's name and Rabbi Chalafta. And Rabbi Meir is another famous one. Now, put yourself in Rabbi or Judah Hanasi, Judah the Prince's position in the year 200 CE. He knew he was caught in a bit of a dilemma. Once you write down an oral tradition, you make it a little inflexible. Once you've written something down, it becomes concretized. While you're just, if I'm handing it down from generation to generation, I can find more flexibility. And the question that he must have faced was this: if I write it down, is it no longer an oral tradition? Isn't it kind of a written tradition?
Right.
And a written tradition isn't as flexible as an oral tradition. And the oral quality of the Mishnah gave it a certain kind of leeway. But he being the world, the leader, the most respected Jewish leader in the world at that time, he saw that things were getting, that the Jews had been dispersed. There had been 3 wars that we Jews fought against the Romans from 65 to 135. And guess what? We lost every one. First, the Torah, the temple was destroyed, and we fought again, and a lot of Jews died. Finally, the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 135, 500 Jewish villages were destroyed in Israel by 135. And most of the Jews, had to hightail it out of the country. There was a remnant of rabbis in a small Jewish community living in Jerusalem and Tiberias and other places that remained in Israel for throughout the ages. But most Jews were living all over the world. There were Jews in Turkey, in Babylonia, in Egypt, in Greece, and in Rome, and even in Spain. And so Judah, in those days, they didn't have Zoom, they didn't have telephones, they didn't have a printing press. He was worried. He had to be worried that the Jews in Yemen would develop a whole different tradition from the Jews in Italy. And the Jews in Babylonia would develop their customs in a way that would be unrecognizable in Morocco. And he said, you know what? We Jews have to be on the same page. Otherwise, we're not going to be one people. And so he wrote it down. He wrote it down.
And that's the Gemara?
No, that's the Mishnah.
It's still the Mishnah. Okay.
Still the Mishnah. The Mishnah, the Gemara didn't come for another 300 years.
So this is
So
still
that
the
was the
oral
dilemma.
becomes the written Mishnah.
Yeah, the oral tradition becomes the now. But he did some interesting things. There was a principle among the rabbis that you followed the majority. It was kind of early democracy. We would, let's say we would be a group of rabbis discussing about whether this or that was kosher on Passover, whether this was chametz, maybe a new kind of grain was discovered, and we had to decide whether it was kosher or not. We had to do that with quinoa a few years ago. Quinoa, incidentally, you can have on Passover, even the strict.
Never knew that. Okay.
Yeah, but that would be an example. But what about rice? That's a grain, but the Ashkenazic rabbi said you can't have it. The Sephardic rabbi, Mati, has it, because he's Sephardic.
That's right, all the time.
So, but we argued. Now, well, the principle was this, though. We followed the majority. We would have a vote. We would say, this is the norm. This is what we do. But we did not exclude the minority opinion. Judah Hanasi recorded what the rabbis said, the rabbis who didn't win the argument. He recorded what they said, the minority opinion. Why? For this reason. Maybe we didn't agree with that particular rabbi in this case, but we saw that his thought patterns, his reasoning was really quite brilliant. He came to a conclusion that couldn't be applied in that particular circumstance, but the wisdom of his process might be useful in a later case. So we may have said his conclusion was wrong, but his reasoning could be very useful to us. And so isn't that a brilliant thing? That allowed us to be able to maybe not agree with the opinion of that particular rabbi, but use that rabbi's thought process in a later case. And now, Judah Hanasi was, he had a lot of material to choose from. He couldn't include everything. So he had to make some judgment calls. He had to, if there was duplication, he would say, I'm just going to put one of these judgments in. He would say, this is a little arcane. It's not so useful. I'm going to leave that out. And those passages were not forgotten by the other rabbis. They were remembered. They were called baraitas. You might have heard of that word baraitas or baraita, which literally means outside of. They were left out of the Mishnah. Later on, when the rabbis were discussing the Mishnah, because we Jews love to study and study and study. The Mishnah, the Gemara was a commentary on the Mishnah. And sometimes a rabbi would, in the Gemara, later on, and they lived many generations later, they might say, there is a baraita, there was a passage that I learned from my teacher that was left out of the Mishnah, but it is applicable. Now, the Mishnah has 6 volumes, or 6 orders. Like this one is Mishnah's Nezikin. I have 6 of these books. There's 6 orders. This one is Nezikin. Nezikin deals with damages. Let's say I lend you something and you break it. How much do you owe me? Or do you owe me anything at all? If you have an animal that's a bit wild and it kills one of my animals, what are the damages? You start a fire in your yard or your field, and it comes over to my. What are the damages, right? Also, about testimony. What about in a case of a murder? How do we interrogate our witnesses? What's a proper way of interrogating a witness? Not to lead a witness in a certain direction, but just to get at the truth. That's in Nezikin. There are 6 books like this. There's another one that deals with, it's called Nashim, which literally means women, and it deals with family law, wedding, marriage, divorce, those kinds of things. There's another one called Moed, which is all about the holidays. How do you keep Shabbat? How do you keep Passover? When and how should you read the Megillah? That's one. You have one about ritual purity. You have one about agricultural law. And so some rabbis, because it was impossible, maybe not impossible for the odd rabbi who was just so brilliant in his generation, but most rabbis could become an expert in one aspect. Maybe it was family law, maybe it was criminal law, maybe it was the holidays, maybe it was ritual purity, whatever it was, and you could specialize in it. But within the Mishnah, there were tractates. It was broken down. For example, Moed is about, literally means season, and it's about the holidays. So you've got a tractate on Shabbat, a tractate on Yom Kippur, a tractate on Purim, a tractate on Passover, a tractate, on Sukkot. And and if you add up all of the tractates, you call it a Masechet, all of the tractates in the Mishnah comes out to 63.
Each Mishnah has 63?
63 there are 6 orders and 63 tractates. So, and you will hear me say Shabbat, I will quote Shabbat, or Sukkot, and it might be from the Talmud. It might be from the Mishnah. Now, if a typical English translation of the Mishnah has about 800 pages. So, the ministers who study, who get ready for the ministry, the Christian, they have the Bible that they have to study. We Jews, we rabbis, we have to know the Bible, and we have to study the Talmud. We have so many more books and you can't be an expert on them all, but we have to have at least a basic knowledge of all of them. So now here's a supposition that I'm going to make. Okay. I haven't studied this. I've seen no studies about this, but I'm going to put it out there. It's no secret. I'm not telling tales out of school when I say there are a lot of Jewish lawyers in this world, right? Lots of Jewish lawyers. Can we agree, Betty? Yes. You got 2 brothers who are lawyers, right? Yes. And we all have lots of relatives, and in a sense,
I have 3, my brother and his 2 sons. They're all lawyers.
There you go. Lots of lawyers. A lot of my friends became lawyers. In a sense, what the training of a rabbi in a lot of ways, when you study Talmud, you're learning law. So we can think like lawyers. Hopefully, we can think in more spiritual ways as well. That's why we rabbis study Kabbalah, and we study the Bible and philosophy, and so. But we have that legal training as well. Now, if you follow constitutional law and the arguments in American society, roughly speaking, you have 2 schools of thought when it comes to the U.S. Constitution. There are those who say the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, is a living document that can be interpreted. When it comes to the Second Amendment, it says the people's right to bear arms shall not be, I can't remember the word, infringed upon. The people. What does it mean, the people? Does it mean a state National Guard? The people, like society. Or does it mean individuals? When I say the people, am I thinking of, and then when it goes on to say, and it does talk about militias later on, does that mean that every individual has a right to have a gun? Or does it mean that every state has a right to have a militia, a well-regulated militia, or the National Guard? What does it mean? Or does it mean every Tom, Dick, and Harry can have a gun? And does it mean any gun? Can I have a machine gun? Can I have a gun that can shoot 100 bullets a minute? And so there are those people who say we have to interpret this. Then there are the originalists. the late Supreme Court Justice Scalia was a great um, originalist. He said, it means what it means. We have to obey it. We have to interpret it the way it was written by those who wrote it. And his good friend, uh, uh, Ruth Ginsburg said, no, it can be interpreted. And they would argue back and forth. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was one who said, no, it is open to interpretation. Anthony Scalia said, no, it says what it says, and that's it. My supposition is this, and I've never done any research to back this up, but I think that most Jewish constitutional scholars, and I would say most Jewish lawyers who deal with the U.S. Constitution, if they are any way sort of in touch with their Jewish tradition, they see the U.S. Constitution as a living document, something that, because that's what we do, we Jews interpret. We've been interpreting once when Moses came down from Sinai and he said, I got this Torah, and they'd say, well, what's written in it? You shouldn't work on Shabbat. And somebody would say, well, wait a minute, I got a store. What do you mean I got to close my store on Shabbat? What are you, crazy? I'm going to be out of... Let's talk about it. Okay, it says, thou shalt not commit adultery. Well, does that mean I can only have one wife? But there's, we live in a polygamous society. Does it mean one wife, 3 wives, 4 wives? What does it mean? What if 2 people have relations and they're not married? Are they married by just having, spent the night together? We got to talk about, and then people would argue about. I'm sure when he brought it down already, the arguments broke out. What does it mean? I interpret it this way. You interpret, and that's what Jews are about, right? We like a lively argument. At the end of the day, in Jewish society, we had to take a majority vote. We had to take a majority vote. They had to say, okay, Betty, what do you think? Marilyn, what do you think? Rabbi, what do you think? And everybody else. Okay, majority wins. We're not going to throw out the minority opinion, but this is going to be the norm in Jewish society, at least for now, till the next argument. So that's why we Jews, I think, tend to be a little more liberal in our opinions, because we see an evolution and a lively debate. And when I'm teaching non-Jews about Judaism, if I'm talking to Catholics,
they're rigid. They're rigid.
Yeah, I would say we don't have a catechism like you do. We don't have a what do you Jews believe? Well, there's certain parameters that there's certain parameters of Jewish belief. If you go way beyond them, you go, well, yeah, that's not really Jewish anymore. But we are an interpretive tradition. Every generation, and this is why I'm a Reform Jew, I see that that it's very much in the Jewish tradition to interpret our texts. Orthodoxy, and that's why I'm not Orthodox. I think orthodoxy
More rigid.
is more rigid, and they would say, oh, you Reform Jews, you're not keeping the oral tradition. And our comeback would say, you've made the oral tradition too rigid. And yes, our ancestors wrote it down, but if you really want to keep the oral tradition going, you have to be able to depart from it a little bit and interpret it. So that's all I have to say about that. So what do you think? I want to hear your opinions. What do you think?
Okay, I have a feeling, in my opinion, that we really don't know, but the world is changing. Did God want us to be part of the larger world where this is where our traditions might change depending upon when we are living? Whereas the orthodoxy goes back to the beginning. And should the Jews be separate?
Yes.
We've been talking about that.
Important question.
Should they be a separate world and not be part of the larger world? What was God's aim? The Jews should lead the world, but I think he did not want us to be totally separated. That is the question.
I think it was 1806 or 1807, I can't remember. Napoleon had conquered most of Europe by this time. Throughout Europe, Jews had lived in ghettos. Jews had been separated from the rest from Christian society.
Right.
Things were beginning to liberalize a little bit of all places, in Germany. They were getting a little better in France, but basically in places where there was a king or an emperor, Jews had a charter, the Jewish community, and they weren't citizens. They were given certain rights, maybe, but they were not citizens.
No.
Now, Napoleon conquers, and we had a whole system. We adjusted to it. Our rabbis we did our own laws. The rabbis were real magistrates. We kind of kept our own deal. We didn't have that much to do with the Christians.
Right.
Napoleon, for all of his faults, believed in a republic, and he believed that everybody should be equal before the law. What were the three words? Liberty, freedom, and brotherhood. What was that? What were the words of the French Revolution? And so he brought 100 or so Jewish notables to Paris, and they called it the Paris Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was the name of the Supreme Court in ancient Israel. So he knew enough to compliment the Jews. I'm assembling a Sanhedrin. There were rabbis involved. There were Jewish secular leaders, and he looked at them and he said, "Listen, I want some answers here. Are you Jews a separate people?
Oh.
Do you obey only Jewish law, or do you obey the laws of the land in which you live?" And so here the Jews, who really, they were given an opportunity to go, if we were given an opportunity by Napoleon to assimilate, to be really, for the first time in history, to be citizens. But we had to give up this idea of
your own
being separate.
Right.
We had to give this idea up that we were separate. And what a lot of Jews did, and some people say this was the beginning of Reform Judaism, the Paris Sanhedrin, a little over 200 years ago.
Saint Hendron, it's called?
Sanhedrin, the Paris Sanhedrin. So the Jewish leaders came up with a document and said, we are, by religion, we are Jewish. By religion, we are Jewish. That is our faith. But our nationality is
where you live.
French, German, Italian, Dutch, Danish, Polish. That is, and so, you know, the early Reformed Jews were not big on Zionism. They really weren't. You know, Reformed Judaism is very much and very Zionist nowadays. But before the rise of, you know, Nazism and how bad things got in Europe, Reformed Jews were not anxious to start, weren't anxious to define themselves as a people. They say, you know, just as there are American, very American Presbyterians and Catholics, American Catholics, American Lutherans, American Baptists, we are American Jews. We are American Jews or Jewish Americans. You can define it either way. The people like to play with the difference between being a Jewish American or American Jew, but I'm not going to go there. The idea was, we're not a people. We are good Yankees. We like baseball. We celebrate the 4th of July. We like Thanksgiving, just like everybody else. But we close our stores on Saturday, and we pray a little bit in Hebrew, and but we dress like everybody else. We're very American, but we're Jewish by religion. And so, you know, Marilyn, some people said it wasn't that we chose to become modern. We had no choice, you know, and it started with Napoleon. We had no, when Napoleon went and tore down the walls of the ghetto, and he says, okay, you Jews, you're citizens like the rest of us, start acting like citizens. We don't, you know, in the public square, we don't care about your religion. You're going to be equal before the law, but you're going to obey the law of the land, not your own deal. You understand?
So
and
what happened in Germany?
Huh?
What
Well,
happened in Germany? They
you
had
know,
Jewish ghettos in Germany, right?
well, but in the 19th century, it was
Yeah.
pretty good for the Jews in Germany.
So it was all one. They weren't ghettos in.
Well, there was an incredible amount of intermarriage. Yeah, just like you're in America, an incredible amount of intermarriage.
Really?
Jews, not that there wasn't anti-Semitism, but Jews were quite accepted. Now, it all started to change toward the end of the 19th century, and certainly after the First World War,
Right. Exactly.
with the rise of Nazism, it changed. It changed incredibly, and it got very bad. But there was a time.
Scapegoats. The Jews became the scapegoats.
That's right. But there was a time, it was shocking for German Jews specifically. It was shocking to be, you know, what happened. They just didn't believe that it could be happening in what had been a pretty liberal Germany. And that didn't happen exactly overnight. It took a while, it took a few decades to develop. And the First World War, some people say, because of the humiliation of Germany at the Treaty of Versailles and the terrible reparations we demanded from Germany, gave rise to Hitler. You know, we so wounded Germany's pride and so impoverished them with our restrictions that, you know, in a way, we inadvertently made it easier for a dictator to arise. So
You know what I just recently heard, Rabbi?
what's
Now,
that?
the president at the end of world, was that Wilson? What was his name?
Wilson, that was, yes.
Okay,
Woodrow
this is
Wilson.
what I recently heard this. There was a program, it must have been on television with the
Mhm.
Corona 100 year, whatever it was. But
Yes,
they said that he got the virus
yes,
brain, and his brain was affected, as many people today are infected by the coronavirus.
I know people
And
who
he
are very
originally
foggy.
was pro being nicer to the ending when they get together with Europe for the treaty. But because he had been ill, it was lucky that he was even there. I think it was there that he got sick.
Yes,
And
yes.
the
They think he
Europeans
had
want
Spanish.
to
flu.
give it to Germany good, because most of the killings, if you think about it, was in Europe. So
Yes.
they really wanted to give it to them good. And he just kept quieter than he originally intended to be, to give them a chance. And that's what began the Nazi and the whole series that happened after that.
Yes, he believed in peace without victory. He said,
That's right.
and if you-
Exactly. That's what
and
it
if
said.
you and
Right.
if you look at who were the bad guys in the First World War, the Kaiser was not a good guy, but there was a lot of we stumbled into that war. The British and the French were not blameless. The Germans were not the monsters that they were in the Second World War.
Right.
They were not. I've read that when the Germans went into Poland and they went into Lithuania, the Balkans or the Baltic states, during the First World War, they didn't kill Jews. They sometimes would live with the German soldiers would sometimes, because the Jews were not so well treated by the Tsar. So the Germans, they came in and they acted like gentlemen, and some of them even boarded with Jews and traded with Jews. So in the Second World War, when the Germans came in, the older Jews who had, dealt with some German soldiers who acted in a decent way in the First World War, they had no idea. They had no idea. I mean,
Really.
they soon found, it wasn't very long before they figured this is a different kind of German,
That's right.
it's a different German army. It didn't take long. Within days, they realized. Phew. But some of them, the first few days of the war, they said, "Oh, the Germans have come in. It's okay."
Wow.
Wow. So anyway, I have a 12:30 appointment. So I hope this has been interesting.
Always
you.
interesting with you. I always enjoy. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.
Stay
And
well, and
I
good luck
will.
in getting
And way to
appointment.
go. Did you hear, Betty, that Marilyn has got an appointment for the 20th
Yes,
to get a vaccination?
Harriet got one also. Her daughter did it for her, and she's going this morning. She was going to get the first vaccine.
How old is her daughter?
Her daughter's younger, but she got it for her mother. So that was wonderful, and she was taking her.
Good. Okay, be well, everybody.
Be
Love
well.
you.
Mwah, mwah, mwah.
Catch you later.
Stay well.